he was so much bigger than me in terms of the level of malicious intent. I mean, for anybody to think that they have a chance against that. I was the bright blonde hair and blue sailor suits, and you do what you're supposed to do. You know, when you're 9 years old, I didn't know anything about anything. I mean, I lived on a farm. We had the dogs in the river and homemade biscuits, and life was wonderful. That is very different than when Fisher was working on some 14-year-old on the training bench, and if you're 14 and every other cell is a hormone, and he twists that, you know. I mean, he was very, he knew how to push buttons and manipulate, and he would use whatever was available. Fisher was the athletic trainer for the football team. What a great place for a pedophile. Back to, did they know? Yes, they knew. Do you let a pedophile be the trainer after many people raised red flags? Willingly allowing Eddie Fisher to remain as the football trainer, that is a pretty willful act. We lived out on Johns Island. My parents were worried about my sister coming home after football games late, so Fisher comes out and brings my sister home. I mean, we had this sort of open family where, you know, it was a very, I mean, we just take people in. And Fisher was from an old Charleston family. He was funny. He had a Porsche. He was, you know, a lot of talk and Mr. Cool. It was just, my parents thought the world of Porter-Gaud. My brother had gone there. You know, it wasn't in the realm of their imagination that this evil monster was at Porter-Gaud. It just, yeah, so I was like in the 6th grade, which I was younger than most of his other victims when it began. I didn't know what was going on. Back to, you know, I remember Porter-Gaud's attorney who graduated from Porter-Gaud saying, well, you know, the next morning, why didn't you go downstairs and tell your parents? If you'd broken your arm, you would have told, you know. What do you say? You know, what words would a 6th grader use to, oh, may I have some coffee? And by the way, this teacher put me in his mouth. I think Fisher and I were a collision course. I mean, there were so many differences about his involvement with me in some ways than with others, in that he told me about other people. Like a good friend of mine who it happened to, he thought he was the only one, because he couldn't imagine that our lives were as crazy as his life. And I mean, I almost don't know which one would be worse, because he was thinking, wow, what is it about me that makes me so crazy that the 4 of us can have dinner at Fisher's house and he's doing this to me, whereas I knew Fisher was doing it to everybody. The crazy thing is, the way that I responded was to start drinking. I was very young. I mean, thank God I started drinking because it anesthetized. I mean, if I hadn't, I don't think I'd be here. I mean, Good Friday, my 10th grade year, I was failing. I was trying to get kicked out to get away from Portugal. My parents were like, they were doing everything they could so that I could go to this good school that everybody thought was a great school because they valued education. I mean, they were above and beyond. I mean, at one point, Major Alexander, the principal, came out to my parents' house and had dinner and said, I think Gary should go off to boarding school. I mean, I think in a way that was him trying to say, get Gary out of here. But my parents were like, we don't want him to go off to boarding school. We love him. We want him with us. So in trying to get kicked out, and I was failing, so I had forged my report card the whole year. And finally, it was Good Friday and report card weekend, and I was going to have to tell my parents I was going to have to repeat the grade. So I was going to kill myself. My mother's response to Gary's in trouble, call Fisher. And Fisher will come. He made himself the person who solved problems for people. So it just kept getting deeper and deeper. And it was like the more trouble I got in, the more you needed him. He made it happen that you got in more trouble. The more I drank, that spiral just kept going down. I do think Fisher and I got locked in this. It was like I was locked in a course of, I've got to do something about this because, I finally got kicked out of Portugal. It was 6 weeks before the end of school. They said, you're so bad, you can't come to school. We don't want you around our students. In that interim, Fisher took a student from the school to his house, molested him. The student went and told his parents. His parents went to the school, told the school. The school said, we'll handle it. And Fisher called. I had been struggling for all this time to get kicked out of Portugal and go to college prep, which my parents were like, why would you want to go to that? I'd already done the paperwork to go to college prep. I'm like, I'm finally getting away from him. And Fisher calls me and says, that son of a bitch, blah, blah, told on me, and I'm getting fired. And then he says, and I'm going to teach at college prep. Well, I ended up going to college prep, and I got there and Fisher got there, and everybody was like, you're both from Portugal, but I didn't speak to him. I remember sitting in his guilty plea hearing, and I heard, there were people from like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and it was the same story. He used the same lines. And sitting in that court, I realized he was so much bigger than me in terms of the level of malicious intent. For anybody to think that they have a chance against that, I didn't really realize that. His single-minded focus and determination to be a predator was beyond anything that a 13-year-old could think through, respond to, had any idea what was coming. The way that he played on people's strengths and weaknesses, and that was just so far out of my realm of. My parents kept a case of liquor under the stairs. And I just early on I would take the whole bottle instead of drinking out of the liquor cabinet. So I'm EYC, Episcopal Young Church. And one Sunday, I'm drinking bourbon in my room all day. My father takes me to church youth group. I don't remember getting there. We were watching some movie at EYC, and I come out of a blackout at the end of the youth group, and everybody's like, what is your deal? I mean, how do you... It added another layer of different, bad, secret. But thank God for bourbon. Because if I had had to feel that, that's why people kill themselves. But then, then when you're I did my 9th grade science project in Fisher's class on teenage alcoholism. So talk about if people were paying attention. But he was the teacher. And then the more it happened, and he was giving us Quaaludes, so because he had this friend who was a doctor who would prescribe them. He didn't take them, but so you just got into that, and then, by the time I had gotten kicked out of Porter Gaud and we were both at college prep, junior and senior, I drank every day. And so it's really hard to be a junior in high school drinking every day and function. And you certainly don't develop. That never occurred to me. When you're fighting as hard as you can like a salmon going upstream just to get through the day, doing well on a test or thinking I should take this so I can take that so I can be a chemistry major, that never came up. The summer after I graduated from high school, I went to treatment at Baker. Fisher took me to treatment. After that night when I had blacked out, and Fisher and I went out to my parents, and he told them I had a drinking problem, but he knew what to do about it, and he would handle it. And so, my parents, we're so relieved that we don't think he's got a problem, but thank you for assuming this responsibility. I went to treatment. Shortly after I got out of treatment, I went to Porter Gaud and told Major Alexander, you son of a bitch, I know you know what Fisher's doing. Because I went to treatment and said, I don't want anything to do with him. Get me away. Now that I've quit drinking, I don't have to. I could, every time I would drink, then you get in trouble, then you need him to rescue you. And he played on that. So I go to treatment, 28 days, stop, 2 weeks into treatment, write him and tell him to go to hell. The day I get out of treatment, he pulls up in front of the hospital to take me home. And I just, burst into tears in the parking lot. Started drinking again shortly thereafter. It took about a year before I could, because I would stop drinking and then I would be sober for a month and then feel, and then one of the people that worked there, I just cared so much better. And years later when this all came out, she was like, we felt so bad, but we just couldn't say anything. I remember her saying that to me. Years later, I go back to Portugal to tell Gordon Bondurant, you're new, you weren't a part of this, this is what happened. I went and told Mage, I knew, call him, check it out. He did call Mage. He acknowledged later that he called Mage and checked it out. And 3 years later, I go back in '97 and say, enough. But until you are actually willing to go to Debbie Herring-Lash's office and sign a piece of paper knowing you're going to have Gedney Howe or somebody similar going through your whole life saying, well, you've smoked pot and taken Quaaludes and Porter-Gaud is wonderful. I mean, that's a pretty daunting risk-benefit analysis for a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 20-year-old, 32-year-old. Why'd you wait so long? It was pretty clear who was being protected. The school was much more interested in protecting A, themselves, and B, the teacher. I mean, it came out in court that Alexander had dirty secrets, the principal. So, I mean, Fisher had the goods on him, so he couldn't do anything. I do think at Porter-Gaud, I think it got so out of control. I mean, it must have been really crazy for Alexander, because I think he knew what was going on, and you would have to wonder, oh my God, is it going to blow up today? But you couldn't get a fire extinguisher. I mean, so I think that dynamic was different at Porter-Gaud, but predators will use whatever blackmail is at their disposal. I have to give Greg Myers just so much credit. He was and is amazing. I had told many people. He was the first person I told that said, okay, let me take this information and do something with it. So that was a huge shift. And he got this information, he started doing with it different things. His law firm threw up obstacles, and he didn't say, okay, he kept going. That was a huge turning point. Greg was on the school board. He wrote the school district. Fisher was still teaching. Fisher, it hit the news on a Wednesday night, and Fisher was meeting a young boy every Saturday to tutor him. And this boy's mother picked him up from school and said, did this happen to you? And he said no, and then 2 days later, yeah, it did. So he was the current, it was still going on. I can either hold the beach ball underwater and not live the rest of my life, or I can let the beach ball go, deal with the consequences, and have a chance at life. This does happen. Abuse happens. It happened in 1950. It happened yesterday. it can unravel and cause lots of damage, or you can stop it, interrupt it, and limit the collateral damage. Why was I willing to do this? You know, if you can stop the collateral damage here, as opposed to 18 years later, that makes a huge difference. And if you spare one child, I mean, people don't have a clue the ripples from one job. So you stop one source of ripples, and that is huge.
He looked me in my eyes and he told me, "Oh, you'll do it." He said, "You know that little girl you introduced me to?" He said that I'll make sure something happens to her. From birth, I feel that I was placed at a disadvantage. I was born to a schizophrenic mother. She was not able to care for me because of her mental illness. I stayed with her until I was 4, and just the neglect and the abandonment and having to be raised by my other brothers and sisters, it didn't work out. So I was placed with my aunt. My aunt was a very strict disciplinary. I grew up in church, and she did not know how to, I would say it became very physically abusive in her household. And parts of that was from how she was raised, and just became generational curses. Then at the age of 4, I started to be sexually abused by some adult cousins who were also in the household. I did not tell because I was threatened by my cousins, and as a child, you don't know that that is wrong. At the age of 12, I became so angry because I could not understand why my mom was the way that she was. And she's schizophrenic, but I never knew what that word meant. We just called her crazy. So in my mind, I didn't know why she was crazy. And at the age of 12, I started acting out, became very violent and disruptive, went through juvenile court, was placed in juvenile. And I did not know that I was reacting off of the abuse that I was experiencing. During that point when I remember one day meeting my aunt, I had come home from school, and I had left some toothpaste in the sink from earlier that morning, and she blacked my eye. And I remember, out of a reflex, I hit her back. And I was so ashamed, I just ran out the house. And about an hour or so later, I came back and the police was there. And they took me to juvenile court because I had hit an adult. And that was my first contact with the law enforcement. So at a very young age, I did not trust law enforcement at all. And then I was placed into foster care. From the age of 12 to 16, I had been placed in 42 different placements where I either ran away or I wasn't perfect enough. If I acted out once, I was sent back to defects. So I realized then that you had to be perfect in order to fit in, and I was never perfect or enough for these homes. At the age of 16, I became a teenage mom without any resources to provide for myself. I could not provide for my daughter. I sent her to stay with her father, and I was devastated because I felt that not only did my mom not raise me, now I am repeating that. I cannot raise my child. And I've always wanted to be the best mom because I knew how it felt to be motherless. And I became suicidal. I was very depressed at that point. And a social worker told me that I did not have anywhere else to go, that the next placement would be a mental institution. And at that point, that was not an option for me. I felt like I was not crazy. I felt someone had failed me somehow. I just did not know who, or maybe I failed myself. I could not answer those questions. And I ran away from the last placement. We drove to Atlanta, and at that time, I grew up in the church. I was still very sheltered, even though I ran away a lot. I had not, at this point, engaged in too many things. So when she took me to a strip club, I really wasn't aware of what this type of place was, because we were on the outside and I just saw the flashing lights, and I'm like, okay. I didn't put two and two together. At 16, you never put two and two together. And she introduced me to this guy, and he said his name was Sir Charles. And at that point, that was not a red flag for me. He was an older guy in his 50s, kind of like a grandfather type. He looked at me and he said, "Wow, you're beautiful." And that was the first time that anyone had ever said that I was beautiful. And he told me, "Let's go for a ride." I rode with him. We rode around the city. And for the first time in my life, I felt like he had unlocked something inside of me. I don't know if it was him or just the desperation, the point that I was at in life, but I felt like I wanted to tell him everything about me. I told him about my sexual abuse. I told him about my aunt and how I had got up until this point. He looked at me. He said, "You don't have to live like that." He said, "You're beautiful. You don't have to be homeless. You don't have to keep going in and out these systems. I know a way for you to provide for yourself." And there were like 9 other girls. Some were younger than me. No one was over 18. And I felt a connection with these girls because they welcomed me in. And a lot of people say that the lifestyle these girls live in is glamorized. I think what attracted me most was the family unit, because I've never had a family before, and that felt really good to me, to feel like I belong somewhere. And later that night, he took me back to the strip club where I had met him, and he told me that I would have to dance. And I went inside. This was the first time I went in, and I saw other girls. And these girls were beautiful. These girls, they were half clothed, but they were beautiful. And they were making money. And that was attractive to me because I needed money, and I knew I needed money to survive and provide for myself. And it looked like they were in control of the situation because no one was touching them against their will. That day I felt like I was letting myself down because I had been raised with morals, and I felt like this is not right. But at the same time, I need to do this. That lasted about 3 days. On the third day, Sir Charles came and he told me that I wouldn't be going to the strip club anymore. And he took me to Metropolitan Avenue, which was formerly known as Stewart Avenue, and that is the location where girls are trafficked on a strip. And I'm in the car with him, and he tells me all these things that I have to do, how much I have to charge. He tells me that I have to make $1,000, and all these things that I'm running through my head, and I tell him, no, I'm not doing those things. I told him that I was comfortable with the dancing. If I couldn't dance, then I wouldn't do anything else. He looked me in my eyes and he told me, oh, you'll do it. He said, you know that little girl you introduced me to? He said that I'll make sure something happens to her. I could see it, like, in his eyes that he was serious. And I had saw him the previous night be violent to one of the other girls. And at that time, I did not want to challenge him. I got out the car, and I'm standing and I'm on the corner, and I realized that this is bad. How did I get from being homeless to here, all in a matter of days? And I felt like I wanted to run, but didn't know where to go, because Sir Charles knew all the places that I knew. He was from my community. And so I stood there, and the girls, there were like 8 or 9 other girls on the corner. And each time a car stopped, they would race to the cars, because each girl was desperate because they had to make their $1,000 quota, just like I had to. And if you didn't make that quota, you did not want to know the consequences. And another dilemma that I had, I could not walk in the shoes that I had on. They were very high heels, and I remember stumbling and trying to walk. So I just stood there. In about an hour or so, the police rode up, and he shined this big bright light on me. And although I was ashamed because I was half clothed, I felt he's going to rescue me. Now it's my time to escape. And I knew that Sir Charles was only a block away watching the whole thing. And he told me that if I got arrested, all the things that law enforcement would do and how embarrassing it would be. And he told me to say that I was waiting for someone if I got pulled over. And so the police shine this light on me, and he says, hey, you, what are you doing out here? And I tell him I'm waiting on someone. And he says, you don't belong out here. You belong on Peachtree Street, where the pretty girls are. I was lost for words. Like, I realized that this officer did not see me as a child. He did not see me as a human who's been bought and sold. He sees me as a prostitute, and I felt hopeless, and I felt like I didn't have any choices after that moment. Now I'm 18, and one night I got in the car with a buyer, and I told him to go in one direction, and immediately he made a detour and went on the expressway. And he started shocking me with some kind of, I don't know if it was a taser, the one with the lights, but it was hooked up to his cigarette lighter, because I was trying to open the door. And instantly I just unplugged it and opened the car door, and at this time he had accelerated up until 65 miles per hour. And I jumped out of the car, and I woke up 3 weeks later in the hospital. Sir Charles came and got me from the hospital. He had fake ID, birth certificate, social security card, under another person's name. And I was released and I healed, but something had changed inside of me. I no longer feared Sir Charles the way that I had feared him before. I said to myself, if I stay with this guy, he says he's going to kill me. No, if I stay with him, I know that either he's going to kill me or the buyers are definitely going to kill me. But if I leave, he says he's going to kill me. And to me, I felt that I had an option. I had choices. Do I stay or do I leave? So I chose to leave. One night I just got dressed as usual, went to the location where I was trafficked, which was Peachtree at this time, where the police officer had told me to go. And I got in the car with the guy and I begged him, can you please take me somewhere away from here so that I can get away from my trafficker. And I told him, at that time I said my pimp. And he took me to a efficiency and paid for me a whole week and just left me there. And I was able to get away. I dropped out of school in the 10th grade, and I don't know anything apart from what I've been doing the last year and a half. So that was the first thing that I knew how to do. So I started exploiting myself, and I got connected with this other girl who ran the escort service. And I said, hey, I could start my own escort service and make a better, more, in my mind, I thought that I was making a safer environment for girls to make money, not children. I made sure they were 18 and over. And I felt that I was making it safer. I was not a pimp. I was not taking all their money. I was a referral service. But in actuality, I was an enabler. I was enabling unhealthy behavior. And I didn't realize that until 2006. I was arrested for charges that are not related to this issue. To make a long story short, I only served 3 years. And when I got out, those 3 years were the most quiet moments of my life, because I had time to really figure out why I was at this point in my life. How did I fall this low? And I realized that I'm 26 and I'm still blaming my aunt, I'm still blaming my trafficker, I'm still blaming everyone for where I am now at 26. And I had an awakening, like, I cannot no longer blame anyone else for what's happening to me but myself. And I took charge of that. I said, I'm in control from this point on. And I chose to forgive. I forgave my molesters. I forgave my aunt. And I wrote them letters. I forgave my trafficker. I didn't write him a letter, but I forgave him anyway. I forgave all the people that abused me in foster care. Everybody that I had been holding on to and continuing to victimize myself. And I released, and I started to restore myself. And I had to take myself all the way back to that 12-year-old girl that I felt I left behind, and reconnected with her and really figure out what was she like if my life had not been derailed by domestic sex trafficking. What were my goals? What did I want to be when I was younger? I remember I used to like to write, and I used to like to read a lot. So during those 3 years, I wrote a book titled Motherless Child, and just start doing things and I reconnected with that child, and kind of like lived my life from that point up until now, and erased all the bad things that had happened to me. The weight of the bitterness and the anger and the pain had become so heavy, and it was just destroying my life. And I realized that I cannot carry it any longer, that I have to release it. And to me, forgiving those who had done all these horrific things to me was the only way that I could release and move forward. Because if I stayed where I was either going to spend those 25 years in prison, or I was going to die, or become a drug addict, or something that I did not want to happen to me. So I just said that, you know what, I'm going to forgive these people, not because of them, but because of me, so that I can move forward. And that's what I chose to do.
I remember him threatening me, telling me things like, if you tell anybody, your dad's never going to come back to Guatemala to come pick you up. Maybe it was because I was a younger cousin. Maybe it was because I was more vulnerable. But he targeted me. My name is Sylvia. I'm 33 years old, and I am from Guatemala. My father worked very, very hard to bring us on to the United States, to give us a better life, education, and to have a better life than he did. So we did struggle a lot as we were children. My dad moved back and forth from the United States to Guatemala so he can provide for the family. We lived with my grandparents from my mother's side. And my mom, she's one of 21 children. That's how many children my grandparents had. And then the Latin American community is very accustomed for all the siblings to live together, even as they grow up and have their own children within their families. We just tend to live in a large cluster of people. We are also very accustomed for them to leave the older cousins to kind of watch over the younger cousins as, the women go out and shop, do whatever they need to do to prepare for the meals while the men come home from work. And I think it was that vulnerability right there that made it a little bit difficult. I remember being about, I can't even remember the age, maybe it was about 6 or 7 when it started. And my dad was living in the United States at that time, and it was my mom and all the girls. My brother wasn't born yet. And when my mom used to go out with my other aunts to go shopping, they left my older cousins there to stay with us. And it was this one specific cousin. He was kind of raised by my grandparents. He kind of went back and forth between his mom, and then the dad wasn't around. But it was him specifically that kind of targeted me. Maybe it was because I was a younger cousin. Maybe it was because I was more vulnerable. Maybe it was because, I don't know. But he targeted me. And it was almost like it was very precise, or he kind of mapped it out, because he would only do it when he knew all of the aunts were going to be gone out of the house. And even when the grandparents were gone, I remember it happening where he would take me into one of the other rooms, and I call it rape now, but he abused me, and he was so much older than me. He was in his teen years, and I was, like I said, maybe 6 or 7, maybe even 8 years old. And he did it back and forth. I remember him threatening me, telling me things like, if you tell anybody, your dad's never going to come back to Guatemala to come pick you up. Or I remember him telling me that, that I wasn't pretty. That's why when I was never going to get married. And when it comes to your culture in the Hispanic community, it is a big deal for you to one day grow up and be married and have kids. That's what you kind of look forward to. And as such a young person, or I was a kid. I was just a little child. I was scared. And, I thought, well, he's my older cousin. He knows what he's doing. You're supposed to respect your elders, which is something that they push. So when he would abuse me, in my mind, I thought this is normal. It didn't feel right. I knew it wasn't okay, but somehow if he's an older cousin and he's telling me that this is okay, it just must be okay. As a child, especially when you're so young and vulnerable, and I like to use my daughter as an example. She's only 3 years old, but if I tell her that the sky is green, she's going to agree with me because I'm the adult and she's trusting me that I'm telling her the right stuff, or I'm teaching her the right way. I guess it's that way. When I was younger, you just assume because an adult tells you something that it's the right thing, or it's the right thing to do. But I remember him doing things to me, and they didn't feel good to me, but he would tell me, he would kind of try to convince me that they felt good, that this was normal, that this is going to make me happy, this is what I needed. And he started off very, very gentle at first, almost trying to win me over as my cousin, trying to give me prizes here and there, give me a piece of chocolate, give me some candy. One of the things that we were never allowed to drink when we were younger was soda pop. We couldn't drink soda. So every once in a while, he'd sneak some soda just to me, and he would say it's because I was so special. But then the second he pretty much brought my confidence down and started abusing me and raping me. I call it rape because I was so young, this is not okay. The second that happened, and it's almost like he got what he wanted out of me. Then he started being the complete opposite. He would treat me really mean, constantly tell me I was ugly, constantly tell me that I would smell, constantly kind of bring me down, and I guess in the back of my mind, I started believing it. Yeah. And then I remember I was in high school at the time. And I remember my mother telling me that we were going to have a family member that was going to move with us to the United States because he needed to raise some money. He was trying to get his life together. And then I remember coming home from high school, and it was that cousin that had, raped me when I was a kid. And I guess I just couldn't understand why he would think it's okay to move in with my family. Obviously, a lot of the memories started coming back, and I couldn't stand him. I hated him, and my mom could just not understand. And, and I almost felt guilt about the whole situation because as I got older, I thought, well, maybe it was my fault. Maybe I asked for it. I was really young when I started being sexually active, and I guess I always just wanted to feel loved. I didn't. I got pregnant when I was in high school, and I remember telling my mom first, and she was a little bit more understanding than my dad was. And I remember telling my dad, and I felt like disappointment towards him. Like I felt like almost like I did something bad, And I know premarital sex is kind of frowned upon
not only here in the United States, but in Guatemala. But, things happen for a reason. And I know, and I guess I'm grateful. As strange as that sounds, because everybody wants to wait until they're ready to have kids. But I honestly, I don't never think that people will ever be ready to have the children that they want to have. But I think Isaac was my blessing. He was just like my answer from God. I just needed to calm down, I guess. And the way I was being so promiscuous, it was probably the best thing that happened to me. And I joke about it now, because, everybody will ask you like, oh, was it a mistake? Was it a mistake? And my response to that is, no, it was a surprise. I was surprised about it, but everybody likes surprises. So Isaac was my surprise. And it's almost like I learned, which is why I think now, Isaac's about to be 15 years old and I have a 3-year-old. So I really learned my lesson because I waited so long to have another child. I just wasn't ready to be a mom again. But, Isaac was born and I remember, and this was right before Isaac was born. I think I was about 16 years old when this happened. That cousin moved back in or he moved with us to our house. And I remember I don't know if it was my grandmother that was really sick or somebody in the family was sick. And my parents, my mom and dad, both left to Guatemala. And when you go out of the country, you can't go for a weekend. You have to go for a long period of time. So I remember them being gone for about a month. They left for a whole entire month and left my cousin that had molested me or raped me when I was younger to be in charge of us. And I was already sexually active by then. I had a pretty steady boyfriend who happens to be Isaac's father. And it's almost like my cousin knew that I was sexually active with him. He never caught me or he just didn't know, but maybe it was the way we were around each other, maybe the way we acted around him, and he didn't like it. He really didn't like it. But I remember my cousin coming up to me and pinning me against the wall. And we had never discussed anything from what had happened when I was younger. And in the back of my mind, I almost thought like, well, maybe I made it up. Well, maybe it really didn't happen because nobody ever really acknowledged it. Me and him never talked about it. He knew I hated him, but he never brought it up. It was almost like as if we swept it under the rug and I moved on, he moved on, and that was the end of that. But I remember being 16 years old. And him pinning me against the wall and saying something to the effect, he only spoke Spanish. And he said something to the effect of, about me being sexually active with my boyfriend. And he saw it. And he said something like, I'm going to show you what I should have showed you those years ago and tried to do it again. But I'm very, very grateful that I was a lot older, a lot stronger, because I was able to push him off, push my attacker off of me, and I remember leaving, and I wouldn't come home, and my parents, they came home from the airport. They were upset that I had left the house without their approval, their permission, and they finally came and got me, and my cousin was gone. He had left. So I finally said, okay, I'm going to tell him. So I remember having the conversation with my parents and telling them what happened when I was younger, and my mom was crying, and they were both very, I guess, in awe. Like they couldn't understand why I held it in for so long. They don't know, where did we go wrong? Were we not watching her? And my dad, I think if my dad could have killed somebody that day, he probably would have. They kicked my cousin out, and, my mom had this idea that, and I'm 16, you listen to your parents, but she thought that maybe if we confronted my attacker, I don't know if she thought it would make it go away. Maybe she thought it was therapeutic for me to point the finger at him and say, hey, you did this to me when I was younger, and you try to do it again. And a couple of days later, my cousin came, and my mom and dad were in the room. We were in the living room. And I remember telling him what he did to me when I was younger. And of course, he denied the whole thing, saying I'm crazy and I'm just a spoiled brat. And, and that was the end of that. My cousin moved out and I never saw him again. Part of the problem in my family. I'm not saying everybody's family has the same problems, but in my family, from my mother's side, my father's side, is we don't talk about the problem. We act like if we don't talk about it, it doesn't happen or it never happened. We act like this is something new that Sylvia's the only one that was tainted. No, it doesn't ever happen to anybody else. But when you actually start talking about it with your cousins, with your aunts, you see that it's very, very common in my family. As a matter of fact, I have an uncle, one of my mother's brothers that's actually in prison for the exact same reason. We've had this conversation before. I don't blame my mom. Things happen for a reason, whether they needed to happen to make me to the person that I am today. And my mom knows that, but I think part of her feels that guilt that, I feel bad that she feels that way. I really do. Because I'm a mom myself, and I would never want to put my children in harm's way ever. That's my life right there. And I think that to me seems to be the biggest problem, because if we ignore it, it's not going to go away. I really wish that some of, I guess, accountability for your actions, getting some sort of, and I hate using the word punishment, but, just knowing that it's not okay for you to do that. Wishing that I had somebody to advocate for me when I was younger, somebody that would have stood up for me, somebody that would have said, that's not okay, and, maybe if he would have been accountable for his actions, I don't know if he had any other, I guess, anybody else that was a victim to what he did to me. I don't know, and I wish that I wouldn't have waited until I got this old to say something to my family. I waited a long time to talk about it within my family. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know that, despite the fact that I shared it with my mom and dad, I don't know that if it ever got outside of just that little room. I don't know if my mom ever told her sister, this is what your son did. I don't know if that ever came to terms with the rest of my family. And I really don't think it did. I don't think my family ever knows that it happened. And part of me feels that, what if something like that happened to him as well? By an uncle, by an aunt, I don't know. Children don't just make stuff like this up. And I didn't deal with it up until I actually became an adult. And even in my marriage, I always thought something was wrong with my husband. My husband's very patient, he really is. But I always felt like, I don't know, like he was going to get tired of me. He was going to leave me one day, or he didn't love me enough if he didn't want to, be more romantically involved with me more often. And it's not until now that I'm an adult that I realized that there was really nothing wrong with him. It was me. I've been married for 10 years now. And it's not until now, it took me 10 years to figure out that sex is not just something you do. Sex is a special bond between a man and a woman. And somebody just took that from me. Part of, I guess, my background and my culture, some of the things that I feel makes us a little bit more vulnerable is because we do come from very large families. Like I shared with you earlier, I'm one of 7 siblings, and that's not that many. My mother is one of 21. So they're accustomed to having multiple children. But what makes us a little bit more vulnerable is that there is so many of us under one roof. That sometimes, since we don't have that conversation, we don't talk about sexual abuse, it makes us more vulnerable when we have those teenage kids or those hormonal adults that may have a sexual addiction, or maybe going through some struggles within their own families, kind of lash out at the younger kids that are the vulnerable ones that don't know the difference, don't know what's going on. Another part in my culture is that women are they're supposed to be very submissive towards their husbands. You know, you do whatever it is that you're told. That's just the way that I was raised. You're here to serve your husband. So sometimes, whether the women agree with the situation or not, I feel that some of them may not have a saying in it. You know, this is what's going to happen, and this is, you know, what may go on. And even if you have that mom feeling inside of you, I mean, do you talk to your husband about it? Sometimes, you know, those are conversations that are kind of just swept under the rug. One of the things that I worry more about my culture is, I don't know that they talk about sex with children in elementary school. I don't think that they have a sexual, hey, if this happens to you, this is what you should do about it. Sex is not appreciated as much as it should be. Sex in my culture is more for having more children, more for pleasing your husband, instead of it being more about the intimacy between a man and a woman and because you love each other. And that, to me, is how I feel it is very hard. It's not more for your pleasure as a female. It's more because that's your job. That's your chore. It's like cleaning the house. It's another thing that you do. And to me, you know, I think if it wasn't for me moving to the United States and becoming very Americanized, I probably would feel the same way as any other Hispanic female will. It's something that's very private to me that I'm making public. And I guess if I can share anything with either survivors or people, even abusers, you know, I want them to know that, you know, parents are watching out for their children out there. And more importantly for me, my life has forever been changed because of something that happened to me at a very young age. And wanting for people to understand that it is not okay. It's never going to be okay. And we will advocate for our children. This is our future, and this is you know, our jobs as parents, and my job as a Christian is not only to make sure that my children are okay, but also that my community is safe. My job really is to serve my community and to serve my Lord, and in order to do that, I'm going to continue to advocate for those young children that sometimes may not have a voice of their own. And for those people that are survivors, just, you know, you sharing something that's this private to you can make a huge impact in what can happen in the long run.
I just remember, you know, okay, now it's time for me to hold tight to my bunny and just suck it up and get through this, and then tomorrow will be just another fun day. Didn't realize that what he was doing was wrong. My story starts at a church. This church was pastored by my dad. Growing up, there have been a lot of memorable people in my life. My father has always been a huge part of my life. My mother, my grandparents, my brother and sister, and you know, there have been people, just mentors and friends that I've had along the way. And there was Mr. Bob. And Mr. Bob was a wonderful man to be around, and you could tell he loved children, was passionate, and loved music. And there were just so many qualities about him that made him like a grandfather to me, or like the cool uncle or something. At the time, I didn't realize it. I was 5 or 6, maybe 7, when it all started, but didn't realize that what he was doing was wrong. I didn't realize that he wasn't supposed to touch me where a bathing suit covers, as my mom would say. And, you know, he would only do this on camping trips. He had a camper, and it was always a blast. We would have campfires and go to the beach or go to the pool, just all kinds of fun stuff.
But I can tell you that the first time I met this man, I had concerns about him, but he But he just kind of continued to whittle away at us and created trust and bonds and friendships and relationships. And so it goes to show that even though you are aware that perpetrators are very manipulative, they're great con artists and they'll do whatever it takes to get to what they want. And so they will manipulate and abuse a family as well as the child who is their target.
I didn't realize what he was doing was wrong, and I didn't realize that that it was something that shouldn't happen, and it's not natural, and it's not right, that it's against the law. So going into camping trips, I knew, I'm going to have a blast until nighttime comes, and then he's going to make me take my clothes off and lay in bed while he touches me. And that happened every time I went camping with him. Sometimes it was with my best friend, sometimes it was with my brother, sometimes it was just me. But every camping trip, it always happened. And then one night, my mom said, if Mr. Bob ever touches you where he's not supposed to, where a bathing suit covers, you need to tell us. And I still didn't understand. I knew something wasn't right, but I just didn't know what and why it wasn't right. And so it continued to happen, and my mom said again one night, she said, if Mr. Bob ever touches you where a bathing suit covers, you need to tell us because it's not right and it's against the law. It finally clicked for me, and I finally realized that he is doing that. When I go to bed at night in the camper, he's touching me where he's not supposed to, where my mom said he can't touch me. He's doing that. So I finally disclosed to my parents, telling them, Mr. Bob has touched me where he's not supposed to. And of course they asked me to be a little more specific, and I said, well, he's touched me where a bathing suit covers, where, like you said, Mom, he's not supposed to touch me there. So, they were shocked.
And I was really glad that it was dark in the room and that he couldn't see my face, because I was trying to keep it under control as he disclosed things that had happened. And it was just a little bit at a time. In fact, his disclosure happened over a 4 or 5 week time period. It was like he would tell a little bit, and he would realize that we were going to be okay and we were going to listen and we were going to believe him. And then he would tell a little bit more. And so you're living on pins and needles. I mean, it's hard enough to hear that disclosure as a parent. It's like being sucker punched multiple times. And yet you're trying to keep it together for your child, and you're trying to listen. You're trying not to ask leading questions. You're just trying to be there for them. All the while, you've got all these things going on inside you.
But telling my dad what I had told my mom the night before, it was easy for me because I trusted my dad, and I loved him, and I knew that he loved me and still loves me, and I knew that he was doing this because he cared and because he was looking out for me. So it was very easy for me to do that, and very easy for me to say, this is what Mr. Bob did, and go into a little more detail. And hearing my dad say, we're going to get him, that was like, seeing the ocean for the first time, or watching your first sunset. It was like, my dad says we're going to get him, we're going to get him. Like, it's going to happen.
And he was going down. There was no two ways about it. And I think the legal community found that out. The attorney that was representing Bob thought he could wear us down, and all he did was make us tougher. And it was a real joy for me when the final day when he got his sentence, and Wesley was allowed to read something to the court, and his attorney, he and I were eyeball to eyeball. I mean, across the room, but we were locked on, and he knew that I was sending him the message, we got you, buddy. You didn't win, and we got you. And it was a victory for everybody. And so I told Wesley that night that, we will prosecute, we will do everything we can to stop him But I went further with saying, Wesley, you know what else we're going to do? We're going to forgive him. Because I knew how important that would be in the whole process too, because forgiveness is, no, he didn't deserve forgiveness, that's true. But Wesley deserved to forgive him so he could be freed from this pain like he was talking about a while ago. And he needed that freedom, and that's what forgiveness does for us. And so from the beginning, we were saying, yeah, we'll do all we can. We will put an end to this, and we will also be okay ourselves because we'll forgive, because this is not going to run our lives.
I can list off children that this man had relationships with and had access to who were about to be the same age as Wesley. And Wesley was able to stand in the gap and say, look, this happened to me. I'm going to tell my parents. My parents are going to do something about it. And other children have been saved because of that. Other children have been protected from this man. And why would you not do that? I mean, what in your mind would keep you from protecting children?
The legal issues took over a year and a half for us to be able to do that. That ought not be. Just drag it out like that.
Well, I think his attorneys wanted to make us go away.
Right, and we wouldn't. Yeah. But then, getting back to the issue earlier that, okay, the legal process is finished now. We brought that to a resolution. That doesn't mean that the hurt is finished.
Things started to happen. I started getting sick all the time. I started having weird headaches. I started getting just really sick all the time, and eventually to the point where I couldn't stay conscious all the time. So my parents took me to the doctor, and they said, there's something really wrong here. Something's going on, and he needs help. So I guess that was when I finally understood that this is bad, and something's happening to me, and I made the connection that it's because of what Mr. Bob did, and because of the emotional and the emotional stress that he caused me and the emotional pain that he caused was why this was happening. And so that began the long healing process.
We're going on 10 years now from when he told us about it, and it's still in process. We can look back and see 5,000% improvement and the great strides that have been made. But then, like you say, there's still triggers. There's things that come up and remind you all the time. It's like grief. You get through it, you think you're over it, and then all of a sudden something happens and it draws you back. And this stuff will do this for the rest of your life, I'm sure.
Well, and I think we saw with Wesley was we saw him look at his experience as a child, and then as he became a teenager, he looked at his experience through a different set of eyes.
It was painstaking and just grueling, and it was a daily battle for a long time. And then I finally understood that I don't have to live in this bondage. I don't have to let this man rule my life, because he doesn't, and he doesn't deserve that satisfaction and that gratification. And so the summer after the senior year of high school, I was at a church camp, and it was down in Daytona Beach, Florida. And one night the pastor gave a sermon on just everything about sex and the biblical background of it, as it is defined in the Bible, and just every aspect of it, going through what every teenager thinks about and what every teenager wonders about and has questions about. And he was driving the point in that sex is not just physical, that there's an emotional aspect to it, a largely emotional aspect. And he said, if you try and tell somebody who was raped that it was just physical, that's like slapping them in the face. And I'm sitting there in the seat thinking, oh my gosh, he's going to say, the next thing he's going to say is, if you tell somebody who was molested that it was just physical. I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to run out of the building. I thought I was going to cry. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was so scared and so worried. And the thing that hit me the hardest was when he said, ask somebody who was molested and try and tell them that it was just physical. He said, ask me, and he raised his hand. And that blew me away, because this is in front of 2,000 people. And I didn't understand. I wondered so. I sat there for 5 minutes just trying to figure out, like, how is he able to do that? I can't tell these people around me that it happened to me. Then I finally connected the dots, and I realized, this man is a man of God, and this man has spent countless hours in reading the Bible and studying it, and it finally clicked for me that he was able to say that because he was able to give it over to God and to experience the freedom that only Jesus Christ can give. And so I realized I told myself, I said, I want that. I really want that, because the way I've been living and the way my life has been miserable. And it's been a struggle and a battle since this all has happened. I was tired of it. I didn't want it anymore. I was sick of being sick. I was sick of being angry, sick of being depressed, sick of having just severe anxiety and stress. I was sick of it. And I finally said, you know what? I'm going to put my faith in God and trust that he can handle this, because he can handle anything, and I know that.
It is pretty freeing to forgive somebody. You have to let a lot go to do that. Because, holding a grudge takes a lot of effort. And it takes a lot of energy. And you got to hold it tight. And when you let it go, then it doesn't take so much. You have to hold him accountable, but we are accountable also for who we are. And if I hold hatred and malice in my heart towards somebody, well, I'm not a very decent person myself. And so, there's accountability to right and wrong and laws, but then there's accountability to who I am as an individual also.
And I can forgive him. Does that mean that I'll ever trust him with another child, or that I ever want to see him in the presence of another child? Absolutely not. But I've forgiven him for what he's done to my child and to other children in the past.
Mm-hmm. And I finally said, I want that freedom. I want that. I want it. I'm tired of living this way. And that night I talked to a leader. I said, I was molested. And when Perry, the pastor, said, when he raised his hand and said that in front of 2,000 people, blew me away. And I want that freedom, and I want that freedom. And he sat there and he prayed with me, and at that point I lost it. I was weeping, and I knew that this was the turning point in my life. This is where I can start new, and I can really experience the true joy that Jesus has for me. And so I was weeping, and the part that really just hit it home for me was this man who had never met me started weeping for me because he cared, because he loved, because he knew what God can do, and he knew the freedom that Jesus can provide, and he was weeping for me because I had received that. And it was just the most powerful and the turning point in my healing process. And since then it's been a joy. I no longer see my story, my struggle, as a burden, but as a passion and as a calling. I can help people through this, and I can show people that you don't have to suffer and you don't have to live this way, that there is hope, and that there is a God in heaven who does care and who does love you and can bring you through the pain and the suffering. And that's why I'm doing this interview. That's why I'm doing this, is because I know that changed my life, and that freedom was incredible, and I want others to experience it.
I held a lot of resentment toward my mom for many years because I could not understand how she didn't know. I could not understand how you didn't know that this man was sneaking out of your bed and into mine. I still to this day struggle with that a little bit, just the thought. The initial abuse, I've actually gone through a couple of different, forms of abuse, ultimately being the same. Sexual abuse being the basis of it. Started when I was about 5 years old. There was a female cousin of mine that used to come and visit often, and from what I can remember, it just started off as small events leading up to much larger events. You know, she would have me to touch her, or she would try to touch me, you know, in places that people shouldn't be touching other kids. You know, she was a couple years older than me. And I was also admittedly a little bit afraid of her because of where she was from. You know, she was from the projects, and so the project people were known to be tougher, you know, and so for me it was just a matter of, you know, fear and not wanting to upset her. So I did everything that she said, and I remember specifically the culmination of it all and behind my mom's garage at her home that we grew up in. And I remember there being a fruit tree back there, and we were back there picking the fruit off the tree, and she decided to make me touch her, and she, of course, and she ultimately wanted me to lick her, and so I had to do that, and I did that, and that was one of the worst memories I have. It was a memory that I tucked away for a very long time. The other abuse started around age 7, and my mom had split up from who I thought to be my father at the time, but that's a whole nother story. And she had a live-in boyfriend at the time who was a firefighter. And I guess he decided that he wanted to sneak into my room. And so that's what started to happen. He would sneak into my room in the middle of the night. And initially, I thought it was a dream. I really didn't believe that it was actually happening, because it would be 2-3 o'clock in the morning, I'm assuming, you know. And he would come in and he would try to force himself into me. And thankfully that never actually happened, but he would definitely try. And that was painful enough. Mentally and physically, of course. And it happened often, you know, and my mom never knew what was going on, and she would leave me with him a lot, you know. If she went to work or took care of other business, she would leave me there with him. And I had a younger sister. My sister is 4 years younger than me, so I never wanted him to touch her. That was really my ultimate goal, so I stayed always. I know that I easily could have left. I could have gone to my grandmother's house and stayed. You know, I had teachers at school that really cared about me that I could have gone to, but I chose to stay and endure what I was enduring, because I figured if I left that he would then turn on her. So I stayed, and there were many occasions that he tried to force himself onto me, make me watch pornographic videos and try to make me do the things that were in the videos, and all sorts of weird things that a 7-year-old shouldn't be privy to. So that went on for 4 years. I was 11 years old when it finally came to an end. My mom and grandmother, I remember, had gone out shopping and they left me with him. I don't even remember where my sister was at the time. But when they came home, I was crying because I had just had enough. When they came home, they were wondering why I was crying, and my grandmother must have just known something wasn't right because her first question to me was, "Did he touch you?" And I said, "Yeah." And I told them that it had been going on for years. And so, of course, my mother put him out right at that moment. And we ended up going through court and things like that for prosecution purposes. He ended up with, I believe, 18 months in prison. But that was it. And so for me, it left me with a lot of anger, a lot of pain, because my family was one of those sweep it under the rug kind of families. So we never again spoke of it, ever. You know, we spoke of it in court. I had to detail and you know, describe the things that he had done to me, but it never was spoken of. Outside of that, I never received counseling or anything. It was just one of those things where you're tough enough to deal with it and we'll just move forward from there. And so that's kind of how it was. And that's what I did, not realizing the overall effect that it actually had and how it would affect the rest of my life. You don't think about those things and how it affects you into adulthood and how it affects the decisions that you make and, you know, the things that you ultimately attract into your life, because this is your way of thinking, or, you know, what you think to be normal. You don't realize the effects that it has. So, and apparently your elders don't think that way either. So I dealt with it the best way that I knew how, and that was just it. I held a lot of resentment toward my mom for many years because I could not understand how she didn't know. I could not understand how you didn't know that this man was sneaking out of your bed and into mine. My brain couldn't wrap around that. I still to this day struggle with that a little bit, just the thought. I have, thank God, forgiven her and moved on past that. I don't hold any resentment anymore, but you do still wonder, how does that happen? You know, how do you leave your child with this person? I don't know what her method of thinking was. Whatever it was, you know, she's my mom, and I know that she didn't set out to hurt me. You know, I don't really know what her thought process were to this day. One of the things that I realized about childhood abuse especially is that because your brain is, first of all, not fully developed, it becomes a part of who you are. It molds itself into your development, your emotional development, especially if it's not handled appropriately or effectively in a healthy manner. If you don't deal with it during that time that the person is going through it, or, you know, just recently after having gone through it, so that you can deal with it effectively, it starts to shape who you become, and it gets intertwined, unfortunately, with your personality in some way. For me, because it was never dealt with, neither of the abuse situations were ever dealt with, and my mom never knew about the first one, however, until recently. It molded a lot of my decisions and a lot of my behaviors. As I started to get older, when I became a teenager, I became very promiscuous. And I've often heard that people go one avenue or the other. They completely shut down or they become really promiscuous. I obviously chose the promiscuous route. For me, it was a matter of trust, though. I had subsequently dealt with a couple of other issues involving rape and date rape and things like that as I got older. So those things to me just kind of compounded. It was just kind of, and I dealt with them alone again because it was just kind of, okay, well, I've already dealt with this before. So this just goes into the pot and it's just cool, and I'll just deal with it. But it became for me, it brought me to the point where I didn't trust people. I didn't like people. I didn't trust anyone, male, female. I became very bitter, very cold, very angry at the world. It was a really awful situation. And it was more awful for me, I think, internally than the people that dealt with me. Any type of child abuse is an awful experience, but I think when you're violated sexually, it tears another part of you, a different part, a deeper part of you away than maybe like a physical abuse or something like that. There's just an added piece that's missing. And so for me, sex just became more of a game. Like it was just used so that for one, I realized that I had a fear of saying no to people because I felt like if I said no, they were just going to take it anyway. I have felt like my entire life that I have had two people in me fighting all of these years. There's like a good side and a bad side, and I've always felt that. And my only assumption is that it had to come from experiencing these things as a child, because I believe ultimately that I'm a good person. But I think that because I've been through so many traumas, that it put something else in me, and those people were always fighting. And it's always, that person that I call the bad person, is the person who thinks that this type of behavior is okay, that accepts this type of behavior if it comes because, well, whatever, I've accepted it before, it just is what it is, but then I have this other person that knows better, but isn't always strong enough, I guess, to overpower the other thoughts. It's a constant battle between good and bad. And even though I'm healed today, I still, deal with it. Those people fighting each other. I was 16 when I had my first daughter. We kind of grew up together, and I was very overprotective of her and subsequently the rest of my children. Even still to this day, I'm very overprotective of my son even. And my girls, my daughter's now grown, and I'm still very overprotective of her, so, but I kept them very close to me. It was very hard for me to do daycare and things like that because I had always believed that my mom didn't react appropriately. A part of me always said that if anything ever happened to my kids, it was over because I know that I wouldn't be able to handle it because I'd already been there and I know the damage that it does. I went through a second marriage in 2004. That marriage was very emotionless. I didn't even like him. So I went into that marriage with the same belief system. By the time that marriage was over, I had just done some growing, and I realized that I had some issues that I needed to deal with. And I remembered, yes, that I had written this book, and that helped me relive a lot of the experiences. And so I kind of turned my attention to self-development. And so I started reading a lot of self-help books and, ways to try to change my way of thinking about people. I literally had been unhappy my whole life. I don't really remember any states of happy at all. And that's crazy to be in your 30s and never have been happy. That to me was huge. And it was a realization that hit me very hard. And I had to figure out how to be happy. I had to figure that out. Nobody could give that to me. Nothing that I tried in my entire life was able to provide me with happy. I tried the marriage. I tried, I had the kids and I loved them, don't get me wrong, but, I couldn't get that from them. Nothing was giving that to me. And so I had to realize that it was something inside of me that I had to change, obviously, in order for me to obtain what it was I was looking for. So I just set out on a mission to find happy. Like, that was just my mission. Like, I have to be able to smile and mean it. Like, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to smile and actually feel what my face was showing. And so that's where my life was at that point. I was actually on my way to a church one Sunday morning. Somehow I ended up at a different church. And when I walked through the doors of that church, I literally felt weight lifted off me. Like, I felt 100 pounds lighter. And it was very weird. I wasn't expecting it at all. I wasn't even ready for it completely, I don't think. But upon entering the service and what started out with the choir, I don't think I stopped crying the whole time, from the time I walked in until the time that I got in my car. And that happened subsequently each Sunday thereafter. And it seemed as though the pastor who was speaking directly to me and some issue that I was trying to deal with. And I was stuck there. I needed this. This was what I had been looking for. So it was this God that my grandmother introduced me to when I was younger, that kept me in church all the time, that I had kind of turned my back on over the years. And that's what gave me the happy that you see before you today. It took that spiritual aspect to help to heal me. I had realized that I hadn't gone through any healing processes. Yes, I had done a lot of self-development and I had matured in thought processes and things like that, but I hadn't actually healed or dealt with any of the things of my past. Again, I had never even thought again about the abuse that my cousin put me through. I had to deal with that. The pastor one Sunday spoke about forgiveness, and I think this is what started me on my path to healing and forgiving and things. He said, not forgiving is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because that's how I've been living my whole life. I have had this resentment toward all of these people in my life. And I had resentment toward people that never even did anything to me. I just didn't like people, period. And so I had to realize in that moment that the problem was me. It wasn't, the whole world wasn't crazy. It was me that was the problem. And so I am the one that needed to do the healing. I am the one that needed to fix me so that I can find this happy that I'm looking for. So that's what started the process. And I started right there in that moment. And I just started to let go of things and just pray and just ask for help with letting go and just, coming to terms with the things that happened to me and why they happened to me. And ultimately there had to be a larger goal, a bigger picture, and at that point I didn't realize that it was to maybe help someone one day that was going through these situations. Up until that point, it was me. Why did this happen to me? Why am I going through this? And not realizing that it's not really about me. And it's not. And that's about January is when that realization hit me. And it was like, you know what? Yeah, you went through these things, but you're still here. Obviously, you were strong enough to endure what you endured because you're standing here today. So there is some elements of you that is a very strong person, and somebody else needs that. Somebody needs you to tell them that they are beautiful and that they mean enough, that it's not their fault that this happened to them. Somebody out there in the world needs to hear that from you. And so you need to take you out of it and focus on helping someone else, because that's ultimately what it's about. And so that brought me joy. That brought me a joy that I had never, ever had before. And so that's kind of where my healing came from. It came from taking me out of the picture.
if someone had point blank asked me, I probably would have told, just because it wouldn't have occurred to me not to. And it didn't occur to me to tell because nobody asked. I think when you're going through such a terrible experience, you feel very, very alone. I'm an Olympian, and yet I survived childhood sexual abuse. And there's plenty of other people out there that have gone on and led happy, successful lives. So I think it's important for other victims and survivors to tell their stories. So I was abused from 5 to 7 years old by a good friend of mine's father. So this was a friend of mine that I was going to their house on a regular basis for play dates. They were coming to my house on a regular basis. So this was a man that I trusted, that my parents trusted. He was always a part of the game. So if we were playing hide and go seek, he was like a big kid in the game itself. He was hiding or seeking or a part of it. If we were playing tag, he was playing. If we were climbing trees, he was climbing trees with us. So, all of my other friends' parents or my own parents, whereas they were always observing us and watching us, he was always a part of the game, which by far made him the coolest parent. And on top of that, he had money and he had a car. So that, made him even cooler. So if we wanted to go get ice cream, we could always go get ice cream. Whereas, my parents 9 times out of 10 said, no, you'll spoil your dinner. He was always game, and he could drive us there, and then he would pay for it. So, this man just had this perfect setup because he was just a grown-up big kid. How the conversation came up, I have no idea, but somehow I ended up telling this friend of mine. And at that point, I'd never really put 2 and 2 together on kind of what it was that had happened to me. And she was the one that kind of looked at me and said, Margaret, I think you were molested. You should tell your parents. And I was like, huh. Because everything that happened to me when I was younger, I was always uncomfortable. Like I said, there were several instances, and I was never comfortable in the situation, but I never put 2 to 2 together and thought, this man is hurting me. This was someone I trusted. This was someone I cared about. Every time, your parent sends you out the door as a young child, you're basically told by your parents to trust these people that you're going to their house. You're sent out the door with basically the underlining theme being, trust and respect these parents, mind your manners, and basically do what they say. Treat these parents like you would treat and respect, your father and I. It's kind of the underlying message. So all of a sudden at 11 years old, my friend is putting a word on it, is putting a label on it. That was really the first time that my brain kind of caught up with all these emotions that had been happening and going, I had sexual abuse education in school, which I didn't realize was apparently very rare. I thought everybody grew up having that. And the same kind of thing. I remember watching videos in school, learning about sexual abuse and getting uncomfortable. I never quite put the dots together. And I never, during this learning process, I never had that wow moment and thought, hey, that's what's happening to me. But the same thing would happen. I would get really, really uncomfortable during this learning process and just something didn't feel right. But I'm still really grateful for that education, because without that education, I don't think my 11-year-old friend would have known what it was. I don't think she would have been, when she heard my story, I don't think she would have had that eureka moment and go, hey, you were molested. I don't think she would have known what that word meant. So that education was still important, because for another 11-year-old to sit there and hear my story and put 2 and 2 together, even if I couldn't quite, make the dots connect, for her to be able to make the dots connect and go, you need to tell an adult, you need to tell your parents, that was a huge step for me. So I go home that day, and my mom's first clue that something was wrong should have been the fact that it was a beautiful day outside, and she's decided that she's going to she had this border that she was going to put up around the wall of her bedroom. And, I volunteered to help. So her first clue, her 11-year-old daughter is volunteering to stay inside and help with the chore when it's, beautiful outside. And I always wanted to play outside. So, of course she's thrilled. Oh yeah, you want to help? Great. And, for the next several hours, I help my mother put this border up, and I tell her my story. I have no idea how she did it, but she listened, and she just said all the appropriate kind of, okay, and what happened next, and all the little bitty words. She didn't freak out, but all the little bitty words of just kind of what happened next, and okay, and she just listened. I got it out in one take. I was very, very lucky that I just, there we go, done. I don't know how long it took us to do this whole thing. I have no idea where my dad and my sister were. They were off doing something for the day, but they weren't at home. So I told my whole story, and then of course, I go off and I go about my day, and of course I leave my mom, devastated in her bedroom with this border that she now hates that's, glued to the wall. It never occurred to me that they wouldn't be there for me, and it never occurred to me that they wouldn't do the right thing, and that they wouldn't go to the police, or that they wouldn't do things legally. And honestly, at that point, it never occurred to me that the legal system would sort of let me down, which is what happened. Which was very difficult, because as an 11-year-old, things are very black and white. There's the right and there's wrong. And that was a big eye-opener for me as an 11-year-old, that there's a lot of gray in the world. Again, I look back at my mother, that she had to teach an 11-year-old a lot of life lessons that you shouldn't have to learn. Like, the world is not fair. You still always have to do what you can control and do what you can do. And they made it very clear from day one that, they were going to pursue this thing legally as far as they could pursue it. And they did. And, that's always meant a great deal to me. My parents never focused on revenge. It was never about, yes, it was about, legally we're going to pursue this man and we're going to try to do that. But the flip side of that was, when I was going to counseling and I was getting help, the mindset was, okay, this thing has happened. We're not going to focus on him. We're going to get help for you. And I'm, and my mom looked at it was, all right, I have an 11-year-old girl who is no longer acting like an 11-year-old girl anymore, or a normal 11-year-old girl anyways, however it is 11-year-old girls are supposed to act. And instead of focusing on this man and just being angry and wanting to take out all this revenge on him, I'm going to focus all my attention on trying to figure out how to make my 11-year-old girl normal again. And so we never talked about him. Yes, the legal stuff was going on somewhere in the background, but we never talked about him ever again. And it was, all the focus was on me and trying to get me back to normal. I think the worst thing that sexual abuse does to people is it takes away your sense of value, and it takes away your sort of that sense of self. It's self-value, and I think the first step to sort of getting that back is when somebody else believes in you and believes what you have to say and believes your story. And that's kind of that first step to getting a little bit of that sense of self-value back. I had symptoms, but the symptoms that I had were not symptoms that our society would deem as unhealthy. I was an overachiever. I felt like I had no value, and I felt like I wasn't good enough. And so the way that I acted out, so to speak, or the way that I felt like I had to gain value was I had to overachieve in everything out the nines. I had over a 4.0 GPA in high school. I think I graduated college with like a 3.4 GPA while swimming, on a college scholarship. I ended up competing in the Olympics twice. And, I had this plethora of all of these achievements kind of that I could pull out of this hat bag, because I never felt like I had value. And so I had to do all of these things because I had this sort of this hollow pit on the inside that I could never seem to fill up, because I never felt good enough. And so I have figured out that there are little things about my personality that to me are not odd, but that are definitely not things that normal people do. And it's been interesting, actually. I've been taking ballroom dancing lessons, and you have to touch people when you're dancing with them. And when I first started taking ballroom dancing lessons, I had to get used to that, because as a swimmer, it's a very solitary sport. You're not touching people, you're by yourself. And it's and dancing is just not like that. And especially you're with different partners, so not only are you just getting used to one person, you're having to get used to different people. And so that's been a bit of a challenge for me, which I think has been a very good and very healthy challenge. And I've been learning various types of dances. So I've been having to not just get used to, like I said, one person or one specific touch, but I've been having to get used to people touching me in all types of places. And again, it's all normal, and it's all in a very platonic way. But it was definitely very uncomfortable for me in the beginning. And, I've been doing it for almost a year now, and there's definitely still times or certain moves when I find myself on the inside cringing. And then, of course, I hope my face isn't, reflecting it. But, I think I do a pretty good job in most social settings of sort of quote unquote acting the appropriate way. But I would say I'm probably not a super touchy-feely person. And yeah, I would say that's probably been as a result from this. I didn't get to the Olympics by myself. First and foremost, I had my parents. I had my family. I had coaches, I had trainers, I had team doctors, I had nutritionists, I had massage therapist, I had the wait staff, and that's not even to talk about at the Olympics themselves. I mean, we had 42 people on the team. We probably had 35 staff or 40 staff. There's so many people it takes to get someone to that level. If it took that many people to get me to the Olympics, why in the world would I think that I could get over sexual abuse by myself? If I needed that many people to become an Olympian, why would I want to get over sexual abuse by myself? So I like to make that comparison of having a team. It took a team of people to get me to the Olympics, and it also took a team of people to help get over my sexual abuse. It took my parents, it took my family, it took my friends, and there were several friends. Not, I didn't tell a ton of people, but my immediate circle knew. My immediate circle of friends always knew. And then I had the Advocacy Center, and I had that team of support, professionally there. And so, like I said, why in the world would you want to do all of that by yourself? But it takes an entire team of people to be successful in life in any endeavor. And that's just one more endeavor. You can overcome it. And it doesn't happen in a day. I remember my mother telling me that at 11 years old, this was something that was current, and every single day I was going to be one day further removed from it, and I was going to be a little bit further from this, and it was going to get a little bit easier every single day that I was further from it. And I think she was right. And I don't know that I'll ever be 100% over it, so to speak. And I don't know that I ever want to be 100% over it, because I think it's had a huge role in my life in developing who I am. And I think it's given me a lot of strength. I think it gave me a lot of strength as an athlete. I think as an athlete, I always had an inner strength because I felt like I'd survived something. I always felt like I could look around the other people that I was competing against, and especially at an early age, I didn't think that they'd ever really been through anything yet. They might have. Who knows if they had or not. But at least in my head, that's what I told myself, was that, everybody around me, these people haven't been through anything yet. And I've survived something. And I learned to gain a sense of strength from that. And so in a lot of ways, as terrible as this horrible thing was, it defined who I was, and it gave me a sense of strength, and it gave me a sense of my character. I think one of the greatest things about that is it shows that you can come out on the other side. You can survive anything, and you can be successful. Whether that success is being an Olympian, or being a CEO, or having a happy marriage, or a happy relationship. So whatever that definition of success is, I think you can achieve it and you can reach it.
Because life's short. I look up the other day, I'm 56. I'm more than halfway home. I'm not going to live my life worried about dying because I'm going to miss living. And so therefore, I'm not going to live my life worrying about what happened to me because I'm going to miss living. I was a regular kid. Unfortunately for us, my parents, they didn't know that they were bringing someone who was a pedophile in. He was actually the teenage son of our babysitter. I have two younger brothers who are 5 and 6 years younger than me, and somehow he took advantage of me, had sex with me, had me perform sexual acts, and it was just was not good. But it created a lot of low self-esteem that I think I masked very well. Eventually in 1992, I finally told somebody. I never said anything for 26 years. And I finally told my wife, which went into a horrible time of panic attacks. I'm still healing after 20 years. One of the things I come to grips with, and the one reason I'm doing this, is that I want people to see, one, the impact it has on you for life, but you can also have a good life, though. I'm a very optimistic person, but there's that part that always dwells back to that negative part. And it's taken a lot of years to realize I am okay. I still have issues feeling as though I let that person get away too, because I never said anything. As I became an adult, I always wondered, did I let him get away? And that still haunts me. And also I had to deal with the anger where I didn't take matters into my own hand once I became an adult. And I really had to work on that too, because there was a time in my life I wanted to get even. And that's where my faith and my love, and I realized that just wasn't the right thing to do. And I had to forgive. Actually, I think he was actually doing something in the bedroom when they were getting ready to go out. I don't know what transpired, but something did. And I remember hearing my parents arguing, and he left, but they never really dug into it. This is 1966, but they never asked me either, other than don't let nobody touch you. But they never said, did anything happen? Are you okay? What? So when that happened, I basically shut it down. So I lived my life for a long time this was my fault. And that's what I mean about how you are. You mentally feel dirty and it's your fault. You let this happen. I can't tell my parents because I've already let it happen. They're going to be mad at me. So, you're screwed. That's why I said it's critical how a parent or an adult comes to a child who suspects it. You got to make that child feel extremely comfortable. But I did question early, is that normal? But I never had those desires. I've never had a desire for a guy. So fortunately, I learned pretty quick no, that's not my makeup. But I do believe that's probably why I was so, when I did start dating, I was always wanted to make sure I kept a girlfriend or had 2 or 3. I mean, that was kind of normal. Had one girlfriend and maybe have a couple others I dated just because it kept me feeling secure in my sexuality about what happened to me as a child. In Louisiana, we went to visit my grandparents, and I remember them rushing me to the hospital one night because I said I couldn't breathe, but nothing was wrong. I kind of had another one at 16 where right before I got my license, so I was 15, turning 16, I started losing all this weight. They couldn't figure out why. I look at that, so I think that was kind of going on. There was nothing wrong. I went through a thing where I was getting dehydrated about 11 or 12. So in college, I would kind of get lightheaded or dizzy sometime. So when I look back now after having panic attacks and understanding and going through it, I realized sometimes my body was trying to react and I just was able to deal with it. But the other thing I came to grips with too, I always kept myself super busy. Whether sports, something, I really never gave myself what I would call time to sit still at all. Because when I sit still, my mind could run. How it all happened, my wife had somebody in her family had been sexually abused. We finally found out. So I finally said, well, that happened to me. But I was okay at first. I said, it happened to me as a child. I'm thinking, that wasn't bad. I'm okay. About a month later, well, first what happened, I started feeling like I was no longer in control. Just in general, I kept going, I don't feel like I'm in control anymore of my life. I would say those things to myself. I started feeling out of control. But what was really happening, the panic attack stuff was starting to happen. So I'm driving down Rockbridge Road, I'll never forget. I was on my way to the Y to work out, and I was on a cell phone with a guy. Then all of a sudden, I couldn't breathe. It was horrible. So I called 911. They came, hooked me up, said, man, you're fine. And here's the other thing I look back now. I went to my doctor, this 1992, it was an older doctor. He's went, you're under stress, take some of these pills, you'll be fine. So I'm like, okay, cool, stress. Well, I'm still kind of getting through it, not thinking much of it, because I'm like, this is one of those things. And about a month later, I went out of town for a leadership meeting. And my wife didn't go with me, I'm by myself. And I'm at this dinner for probably 50, 60 of us. Happens again. All of a sudden I can't breathe. I'm like, man, I'm dying. Can't catch my breath. Panic. Guy takes me to the hospital. Say, you're fine. I spent the night. Didn't sleep. I'm starting to get the shakes now. And I had to drive home 4 hours from Sea Island. 5 hours. That was the longest ride of my life because I'm having them every so often now, driving. I get home, I just fall apart. I had trouble driving by myself for a long time because my first one was driving. I had trouble being in a crowd for a while because even today I can't be in the center of a crowd no more. I have to now always be on the outside. I developed some claustrophobia from it. I don't even know if I could play football now and be under a pile just because of that feeling. And I still didn't know what was going on. Then I talked to a psychiatrist at my church, and she said, you might be having panic attacks or something. And I talked to a cousin who was a psychologist, and she kind of said the same thing. Well, before I talked to them, though, I went and had every kind of test you can think of. I mean, I had sleep tests, brain wave tests. I mean, I told my wife, boy, I knew I was healthy because everything was fine. So now I'm really freaking out because I'm like, how can everything be fine and I'm having these problems? I mean, all of a sudden my muscles would just start just twitching uncontrollably. But at the same time, I always say, man, again, that's why I say I was so blessed, but I could handle the things I had to in my business. And my business was only, at that time, was only 4 years old. I mean, that was a real critical point in my business. I mean, again, God just blessed me because I couldn't even go in the office and stay more than about an hour or so. And then I had to get on, some medication to try and help. 1992 was just horrible. Yeah, I let my kids know because they were trying to figure out, why is Dad crying? I mean, I would just cry. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, but I let them know what happened. But I told them in such a way that, as they got older, I told them more. I mean, I really made sure they knew why and what, and always talk to us. So we have a very open family where there are no secrets. I talk to them, and you always talk to your kids about people touching you. So I talked to them as probably early as 4 or 5, but I didn't discuss what happened to me until 7, 8, somewhere in there. I just told them what transpired, and that's why you have to be careful. That's why I want you to know you can talk to us about anything. Say no, they can't hurt you. So, I made it very clear to them, but I said it in such a way they knew if something did happen or did happen, it would not be their fault. We would not do anything to blame them. I think I made it very clear to my kids very early how much I love them, and Daddy will do whatever he has to take care of you. You got to make a kid feel very comfortable that no matter what I tell you, like I tell my kids, I might be mad at you, but we're going to deal with the situation first. And I'm going to deal with it in a way where I love you, and we're going to talk. Because I tell them, I can't replace you. Anything else we can deal with, but I can't replace you. So whatever's going on, we got to talk about it. Any guy who dates my daughter, I tell them point blank, I got 3 rules. You don't hit my daughter under no circumstances. No means no. I'm not saying you ain't going to have sex, but no means no. If you hear a grunt, you ain't sure that's no. And you don't disrespect her. I say, as long as you don't break my 3 rules, we're good. And then I got a gym downstairs. I take them in my gym, and I'll take 50, 60-pound barbells and do arm curls. Now, when they leave, I'm hurting, but I let them, think I'm still, incredibly strong. So I do my own little Jedi mind tricks on them. Let boys know, I'll do some damage. And it's funny because even though I say that, I mean, I'm not going to really do it. It depends what they did. So that's kind of how I did my kids growing up. I let my kids go spend the night. Now, one of the things I'll say, when my daughter was young and my wife was working at midnight on the weekends, sometimes girlfriends spend the night. A lot of times I was uncomfortable having a young girl spend the night because what happened to me, I never wanted to be accused of that. Because that's the other fear. So often they say if that happens to you, you might become an abuser too. And I never wanted anybody to think I would be an abuser because I'm like, man, what I've gone through, I would never do that to another kid. So that's the other part that messes with you too, why you really a lot of times don't want to say anything, because there's the stigma that goes with if you've been abused, you're going to be one. So society really kind of makes it tough on another person to kind of come forward because so often that's what you hear. So a lot of people who abuse people, a kid, they're like, oh, I apologize. I mean, it only happened once, or it only happened twice. I mean, they're okay, they're over it. So they still think, well, I apologized, or I bought them something, or, I paid for college or something. They don't understand the damage they do. Because most of us who are victims, we don't ever really tell how bad it is. I will live with this for the rest of my life. It'll never be gone. And that's why I have so much compassion for soldiers or people, anybody who lives with post-traumatic stress syndrome. I mean, you do live with it for life, but the other point is you can live. And that's the part I want to make sure is important. This is not a death sentence. It's just a part of your life you have to learn to deal with, learn to control, learn to accept the triggers. Like, I know every so often I'm going to hit the wall. I just need to stop, chill out. I'm just kind of pressing and not really going anywhere. And that's why even today I come up like with real athletic challenges like half marathons. Now I'm into biking. I just came off a 100-mile bike trip plus in California. So I'm always finding things where I had to be disciplined for like 6 months and push myself physically. And it makes me be alone with myself mentally. Like when I bike sometimes, it could be a 2.5, 3 hour ride. And I don't even listen to music. So I'm making myself get comfortable, but I love outdoors. So I have to do things that are outdoors, but in nature, and I see all the beauty. And like I was riding Sunday and I was thinking about this. But I'm really getting to a point that I like being alone mentally. For years, I never wanted to be alone mentally. So I make these type of physical things because it makes me have to be alone physically and mentally. When you're a child, you don't think about it as much. But I think when you become an adult, and again, I'm only talking from my point of view. I don't know how other people feel. But for me, there's no closure. Because I don't know, was he ever punished? Did I let him do this to other children? How come I didn't have the courage to speak up so he could have went to jail? So those things eat at you. That's why even revenge doesn't really work, because you still haven't brought closure. Even if I could go get even, that's not going to solve my problem, because now I got another issue to deal with. The guilt of what did I do? So to me, the important part is you got to be able to really forgive. And that is forgive yourself. Forgive that person in a way that you can move on. And then you just got to have trust if you don't have the courage to bring them. And I understand that. Trying to get justice in the legal system, you just got to let it, you can't spend your life worrying about getting even. You got to believe in a higher being that's going to handle that. Or or as karma, it's going to work itself out. First of all, I have a dream for any child who's been abused, and whether you're an adult or still a child, life is okay. You will get through this. You can make it, regardless of how hard it is right now. Life is still good. You still have a reason to live. You still have a reason. You can make a difference in other people's lives, and you can be very, very successful, and you can have a great family and your own children. To parents of victims, love that child. Embrace them, make them feel whole, let them know it's not their fault. But also don't blame yourself as long as you really didn't put them in a position. Like my parents, they had no idea. You got to forgive yourself too. You can beat this. You can. You got to know you got to believe you can. And you got to have people around you who's helping you too, though.
The one thing that I knew as a child is that there was no hope for me of it stopping. My father was my role model, and I did adore him, and I did love him. What happened to me, he started coming into my room when I was 5, until I was 18. And the one thing that I knew as a child is that there was no hope for me of it stopping. And as I look back, I was right. There was not one person who would have been able to help me. And so as a survival tool, I dissociated. I call it split. What happens to a child who is traumatized and terrorized, if you know that it's going to keep happening, there's no way you can go to school and get A's and play marbles and play tag and ride your bike home and be a happy child if you know what's waiting for you and that you have no power to stop that. My eldest sister Gwen, who is also an incest survivor, I watched her be beaten and sent away to a boarding school. I'd never heard of a boarding school. When I was 7, I just knew that she went away. So I learned very quickly that to be defiant is not a way that I should go. So that took that tool away from me. And so what I was just able to do as a child, which is very common, is to, I call it split my mind. And I split into what I call a day child and a night child. And it's very real to me. I don't remember this, but I believe it happened. I believe that somewhere in my mind, as a young child, I said, okay, you stay in the room and you take what you have to take, and I'll go out and I'll be very successful. And when I'm free and successful, I'll come back and get you and save you. And I believe I struck a deal. So I did. I went out and I was successful in everything I tried. I graduated with Phi Beta Kappa honors from college. I was on the ski team. I was in the modern choir. I was homecoming queen. I was Miss America. I was named the outstanding woman speaker. I mean, everything I tried, I was just successful, successful, successful. The problem is that I didn't want to go back and get her. I hated and loathed and despised her more than anyone I could ever dislike. I wanted her to go away. And instead of going back and welcoming her into my life, I wanted her dead. And I think that my recovery would not have been as difficult as it was if I had been able to have compassion for the child I call the night child. And because I could not have compassion for her, and because I didn't want her ever to be in my life or ever acknowledge her, she played havoc with me. And I do believe that. I believe she's the one. I think I characterize it as a child going in and saying, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," and the mother said, "I'm busy now, I'm busy now." And the child goes back in and says, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," and pulls on her dress, and she says, "I'm busy now." So the child goes and takes the best piece of crystal she can find and crashes it on the floor. Now she has her mother's attention. And this is what began to happen to me as an adult. When I was 39, I went into physical paralysis and was unable to move. My head would work, but my body wouldn't work. And I was hospitalized for the better part of 3 months in 3 different hospitals. I went to the Mayo Clinic, and they said, "We can find nothing wrong with you." And I had paralysis spells for 11 years, from age 39 to 51. And finally, I didn't know what else to do, so finally at age 40 I went into therapy, and I began to start dealing with what had happened to me from age 5 to age 18. You live a lifetime of isolation, and it's something that I used even as an adult. I chose a career that was isolating. I chose to be a public speaker. I got on a plane by myself. I went to the hotel by myself. I stayed in the hotel by myself. I went for 1 hour. I was with people, and then I go back to the hotel, back. Very isolating. I grew up. You don't have relationships with anybody. All I had was my father. And that's like a sugar pill laced with arsenic. I never had a relationship with my mother or my sisters. You can't. The secret is too huge and too intense. I looked like I fit in school. I was homecoming queen. I was constantly being voted everything. I looked like I fit. But when people say, are you going to go back to your high school reunion? Why would I go back? I don't feel any close connection with anybody. Were you going to go back to your college reunion? Why would I go back to my college reunion? I don't feel a strong connection. I never just could allow myself to be known, because you keep so much of yourself private, because you believe, because I believed, as almost every sexual abuse survivor believes, if you knew this about me, you would never want to speak to me again. And no matter how many honors I won, and I won them, here's this other part of me. This is who I am. And then, but if you knew this about me, you would never want to be with me again. We don't, most of us, unless it's rape by a stranger, but if we are violated by someone who is a trusted person, it's the only person then that we have. It's a connection. It's the only connection that we have. What I wanted to my father's death was his daytime love, and I never got that. Not one day of a daytime father's love. I just got him at night, and that's all I had, and that's all I had to cling to until I met Larry Atler when I was 15. And then I think everything really began to change, because I fell so deeply in love with Larry. I was a sophomore in high school and he was a senior. I thought I would fall in love with a tall, blonde Swede with blue eyes, and I walk into student council and here's this kind of swarthy complexioned, brown-eyed, and it was just as if my heart just left my body. And our love was so deep and so intense, and he never betrayed me. In the almost 40 years we've been married, he's never betrayed me. I could trust him. Even when I did crazy things like marrying somebody else, he just has never let me down. And I think I'm unusually fortunate to have found someone at such a young age that I could love and who would love me in return. Larry has loved me unconditionally. Believe me, I've put him through every test there is. There isn't a test I haven't put him through. And one of the first tests was marrying somebody else. That's a very big test. And I married into a situation that was an abusive one, not because my first husband, I'm not going to say our relationship was abusive. Was he abusive? No. Was our relationship abusive? We were oil and water. And I would have continued doing that. We choose because we feel unlovable. We have to marry into relationships where we're not treated well because we don't believe we deserve to be treated well. And fortunately, I had enough courage to leave that marriage in 3 months. And I am forever grateful that I had the courage to do that. And I went to New York, where my career was, and I was living there feeling like the worst person. Miss Americas don't get divorced. You just don't get divorced. And after the divorce was on the front page of the paper, I got a letter from Larry, and he said, of all the things we have been together, most of all, we've been best friends. If I can be a friend to you at this time, please call. If not, let this letter be as a leaf in the wind. And I just started crying, and I was living with another Miss America, and I said, I just can't call him. Look what I've done. He was getting ready to ask me to marry him, and I married somebody else. And she said, he wants you to call him. And I did. And we got back together, and we were going to be married. And then I started running from him again. And I didn't have anything to do with him. Then he starts going with somebody else named Marilyn. All of his girlfriends were always named Marilyn. And then I'd come back to Denver, and we were going to get married again. And then I'd get on a plane and move back to New York, and I wouldn't return his calls. And it was just craziness, and I had no understanding of why I was sabotaging my life, and I was. And because I had split, because I had dissociated, because I had repressed the memories of incest, I didn't know what was running my life. And the same year that I met Larry, I met a youth minister, and for 9 years, he just kept sort of watching what I was doing, and he would say to himself, "That didn't make a lot of sense what she just did," but he didn't think too much about it until I married somebody other than Larry. And then he said to himself, "There's something here that I don't know about." And then when I divorced after 3 months, he said, "Okay, after 9 years of watching what she's doing, I now believe she's trying to destroy herself. I just have to figure out why." And that's when he began asking searching questions. And one day, as unbelievable as it was for my family, I grew up in the picture-perfect family. I was called the debutante Miss America. I was the first Miss America that they ever brought a family up on stage. They didn't bring families up on the stage. They took one look at my family. They went over the midnight hour. They paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. They knew this. They knew. And they said, "Bring the Vanderburg family up." They parted the waters in the... They walked up on the stage. I mean, it must have taken them a good 3 minutes to get to this. "We want you to meet America. We want you to meet the Vanderburg family. These are the 4 beautiful daughters and the mother and the father," because we were a picture-perfect family. Incest in our family? Who would have even thought of the word in the 1950s? And he just asked me the question and saved my life by doing it. I think he asked, "Did your father ever come into your room at night?" And I never answered the question. I just started crying. And there it was. There it was. And the reason that I kept running from Larry is because I didn't feel worthy of him. If he knew who I really was, then he wouldn't want me. And then I had to tell Larry. And you ought to try telling someone that you love, who thinks you're the most perfect. He's always felt I was just perfect. And you ought to try to find the words to tell him that you're not who he has believed that you've been all these years. And I just always thought the youth minister would tell him. It never occurred to me that he would make me tell him. And we had Larry fly to California, and when he came in and sat down, I just started crying. And I'm waiting for Dee Dee to tell him. And this minister is so wise. It's a part of the healing process. You don't tell somebody else's story ever. You never tell somebody else's story. It was not his job to tell Larry. It was mine, and he knew that. I don't know how he knew that, but he knew that. And he knew it's the first step in the healing process to try to find those words. Well, the youth minister said, "Marilyn has something to tell you." I couldn't even raise my head. I could never have looked Larry in the eye to try to tell him that I'm not who you think I am at all. I'm a really bad person. And I don't know what words I used, but when I don't know how he ever could have put it together, but he just came over and just took me in his arms, and he just said, "I understand everything now. I understand everything now." Larry always understood the big picture. He always understood how that would impact our sexual relationship, which shut down completely twice. He understood that that would impact absolutely every aspect of my life. He never said to me, "How could you love your father? How could you love your father?" Which people still say to me. "How could you love your father?" Larry would say, and Larry despised my father, understandably. And Larry would just say, "He's your father. He's your father." And when I finally went into full-time therapy and I'm trying to figure out, I hate my father, I love my father humiliated and degraded me, I wanted to find one word to describe my feelings. This is how I feel about my father, because people who knew wanted me to say, "This is how I feel about my father." Everybody wanted me to say, "I hate my father." And I know that's what people wanted me to say. And I just needed one sentence, "This is how I feel about my father." And finally Larry said to me one day, he said, "You know, you take the white off of a golf ball and you see all of these rubber bands completely intertwined. He said, you can't pull one of them out and say that I hate my father, or you can't just pull another one out. They're just, he said, this is how you feel about your father. This is how you, and I said, that's how I feel about my father. I have all those feelings. I have all of those mixed up, crazy mixed up feelings. And I continued to love my father until I was 56. Until I received a letter from a woman who told me that my father had never stopped. My father continued to sexually violate children and teenagers until he died at age 75. They never stop. They never stop. Is there an exception to that? I'm sure there is. Would I trust my child with any kind of a sexual predator? Absolutely never. Not for 10 seconds. My mother walked down the hallway one night. I was about 11 or 12, and my father always came in late at night. Late meaning 10, 11, sometimes midnight. And he'd been in my room for maybe a half hour, and all of a sudden I heard footsteps coming down. I could hear the first step, and then the second step, very, very, very slowly, and then the third step. And she was now about 12 feet from my door. And I waited to hear another step. And it was a dramatic moment when everything stopped for all three of us. All three of us knew exactly what each one of us was thinking and knew. It's the only time I ever felt my father afraid. He just stopped. And I thought, it's going to be over. She's going to come in. And we waited for that dramatic moment. And then I heard a step up the steps and up the steps and up the steps. And I knew she would never come through that door. And I knew she would never, ever come to help me. Do I believe she knew? Absolutely. I had a reporter say to me, did your mother know? And I said, it went on in our home for 18 years. And the reporter said, but did your mother know? And I said, it went on in our home for 18 years. Would you know if something went on in your home for 18 years? Of course she knew. Did she repress it? Is that how I learned to dissociate? Maybe. Maybe. Maybe she just couldn't deal with it, so she just put it somewhere and wouldn't think about it. But I do believe she made a decision. I believe she made a choice. And she didn't choose me. When I felt an obsession to talk with her, and it wasn't I need to talk to my mother, it's I have to talk to my mother. I was 48 years old, and my father had died a year earlier, and I all of a sudden just had to confront her and find out why she never helped me, why she never stopped him. And so I went over and I just sobbed and sobbed. I just couldn't get the words out. I just that deep kind of gut-wrenching sobbing. And when I finally was able to get, they were not sentences, they were words. When I finally was able to just get the words out, I looked up and she was sitting there with her arms folded and she said, I don't believe you. It's in your fantasy. I never expected that. Never. I was so stunned. I stopped crying. It was as if she had just slapped me hard across the face. And one of the important things that I want people to understand is that it's never too late to be a mother. If when I went to her after my father had died, if I had gone to her as I did and cried from the depths of my being, I wanted her to be my mother. I wanted her to say, I am so desperately sorry I wasn't there for her. I wanted her to weep with me. If she had done that, from the depths of her being, not a, oh, I'm so sorry, or a boo-hoo. I mean a real depth of despair. I would have had a mother. If she had done that at any point along the way, I would have had a mother. It's never too late, in my opinion. It never happened. And to her death at age 88, she was never able to say to me, I am so desperately sorry for what you've been through. Where was I? I don't know how this could have happened for so long in our home. She never said any of the words that I needed to hear. I didn't get a mother and I didn't get a father. But, oh, did I marry into a family. I have a husband that cherishes and gives me unconditional love. I had a mother-in-law and a father-in-law who gave me unconditional love, although I was not able to tell them until they were in their 80s. I had too much shame. Even when I was in a psychiatric ward, even when I was in paralysis, even, they saw me go through my craziness, and I thought it was okay if they just thought I had craziness. That was better than have them knowing I was an incest survivor, because I could never tell them that, because then they would not love me anymore. That belief system goes on for way too long. And I finally, the only reason I ended up telling them when they were in their 80s is because I was having deep paralysis spells. And my mother told my mother-in-law, they were best friends, which was so hard for me, that the reason I was having paralysis spells was greed over the estate. And what my mother didn't know is that my mother-in-law would ever discuss it with me. And I went over one day and I called my mother-in-law Nan, and she said, my darling, your mother has told me what these paralysis spells are about, greed over the estate. And I just thought, oh, isn't my mother good? And my father-in-law had the most incredible response. He rose and he said, I will never speak to your mother again. Oh, how validating is that? And I said, thank you, Papa. But this is not about you and my mother. This is about me and my mother. You can be friends with her. It's okay with me. But so protective. This is what we want to hear. I'm here for you.